Okay, so today I'm doing a video where I'm going to be recommending good starting points for both fantasy and sci-fi. I've done a recommendation for good starting points for adult fantasy. No, for just fantasy in general, adult and YA. I've done that video before, but recently I've been getting that question a lot again as I've been doing my subscriber recommendations videos, which I'll have linked, I guess, if you don't know what I'm talking about. That question keeps coming up, like, how do I get into adult fantasy, or how do I get into adult sci-fi? I read mostly YA and I don't know how to get into the adult side of it, which I do think almost every genre, there's not a huge transition from young adult to an adult, just read adult books. But truthfully, with both fantasy and sci-fi, there is a bigger gap between the two age categories. So I'm here to make another video on it. But before we get into all of that, a shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. From websites to online stores to marketing tools to analytics, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that helps you to build your website and grow your business. We'll talk more about them at the end of the video. I will say that I'm going to intentionally not say any of the books that I said in my last How to Get Into Fantasy, or rather books that are good for a starting point for fantasy video. I'll have it linked there. I'll have it linked in the description. Be sure to watch that because there are several books that I wanted to put on this list, and then when I looked back at that old list, they were already there, so I'm not repeating myself, but there's really good recommendations on that list for both young adult and adult books. Though in this video, I'm focusing on adult books because that's the comment that keeps coming, but there's several adult books on there that are perfect starting places. Go watch that video. But now let's talk about some more. Now you have 2 videos full of amazing recommendations for great starting points for adult fantasy and sci-fi. Okay, the first book, we're starting with the fantasy category, then we're going to get to sci-fi. The first book on the fantasy list is going to be a recent read for me, and that is Sufficiently Advanced Magic. This is technically categorized as adult, but I feel like it's kind of in between. The main characters are fairly young. It is, in a lot of ways, a coming of age. Not your typical coming of age, but it's in that kind of bracket of self-discovery. This is kind of a, you can tell that the author of this book really loves video games. But basically our main character's brother entered this tower 5 years ago, and this tower is this place of ever-changing rooms, and each room has different obstacles, different monsters to face. And if you get to the top of the tower, then you get a specific blessing type thing from the goddess, and his brother entered 5 years ago and never came out. So now Corin, our main character, is going in and he's on a mission to reach the goddess to learn how to save his brother if his brother is still alive. This author's writing style is super accessible, really, really easy to just fly through the book. This is probably one of the fastest fantasy books, the fastest I've read a fantasy book. Usually I read fantasy books fairly slowly because I'm wrapping my head around a new world, a new magic system, a lot. There's a lot to wrap your head around. And this is probably the fastest I've read a fantasy book in a really long time, because even though the magic is fairly complex and there's a lot going on in this book, the way it's written, both in prose as well as in how the plot is formatted and set up, it's all just very straightforward, well written, but very straightforward and just easy to dive into and run alongside your characters. Also, it's just really fun. Next book on the list is going to be 2 books, Elantris and Warbreaker. So these are Sanderson's 2 standalones, and actually Warbreaker is only a standalone temporarily. He's eventually going to build on it to make it into a series, but as of right now, it's a standalone and it will be for a long time. According to Sanderson, don't hold your breath. Elantris is kind of about a virus / plague thing that is plaguing a city. And Warbreaker plays on a lot of typical tropes, but does them in really unique ways. A princess being married off. There's also a war going on between gods. It's been so long since I've read both of these books, so my descriptions are pretty bad. Warbreaker has this amazing magic system based off of colors, and I just remember, there were so many characters that I loved so much in Warbreaker. I loved Warbreaker so much. Both of these standalones are probably some of Sanderson's works that get the most mixed reviews, but Sanderson has such an accessible writing style. He has such complex plots and really interesting characters, but he writes it all in this way that's so easy to wrap your head around everything that's happening. And he is guilty of having very slow starts for most of his books, so you have to give him some time. But if you're willing to do that, his books are just easy to gobble up, especially Warbreaker, because it plays on so many, especially young adult tropes that are very familiar, but he does them in such a unique way. I really recommend Warbreaker if you're trying to transition from young adult to adult, as long as you're willing to give it some time. If you don't want to give it time, if you want something that's going to be easy from the start, then what did I just do? Sufficiently advanced magic, I would say pick that up first. But if you're willing to take a little bit of time, I love Warbreaker so much. Next, I'm going to recommend The Black Prism. The reason I recommend this is because we follow several main characters, but one of those main characters is a teenage boy. So it's an adult book, but one of the perspectives is a kid. So it's a really easy transition, because you're basically getting a little bit of both. Kip is insecure and he's definitely has a coming of age arc. He's angsty. He is in a school setting for certain parts of the books. I've only read the first 2 books in the series so far. The series as a whole has some pretty mixed reviews. A lot of people don't like certain things that the book does, which is basically sexism. The book is, the series as a whole, there's a lot of discussion on if it's misogynistic, if it's sexist, if it's not. I don't want to go into that here, but a lot of people say that it is and they don't like it for that purpose. A lot of people say that it's not and they don't think it's a valid criticism. Just go in knowing that that is a big discussion, and it is a heated discussion around this series. But other than that, this series has really, really high ratings generally. And honestly, it's one of the coolest magic systems I've ever read. I have very mixed opinions on it. There's a lot of character work, a lot of character choices that especially book 2 graded against me. And I still haven't continued the series because of several things that we've already mentioned, but I probably will continue eventually. It's just not very high on my list right now, but the writing style is very accessible. One of the main characters is a kid, and it has such a cool magic system and really interesting plot. It is the type of story that there are going to be a lot of questions and a lot of open threads, and you're not going to get answers anytime soon. It's going to take books for you to get there. So if that's cool by you, go for it. I loved the first book. I had very mixed feelings on the second book, but it's a well-loved series. Last book on this list is Rage of Dragons. And I intentionally left this for last because as far as getting into fantasy, it's probably the hardest one on this list, but honestly, it still belongs here. Keep in mind, me saying this is a good starting place for fantasy is not me saying that it's any less of quality to anything else. I obviously enjoy pretty much all these that I'm talking about. And I love Rage of Dragons. So this takes place in a world where 1 in every 1,000 women is able to call down dragons, and 1 in every 100 men is able to basically transform into this fighting, killing machine. They live in a kingdom in an area where they are constantly at war, they're constantly being attacked, so these battle things are pretty necessary. We follow Tao, who is a lesser, and due to a set of circumstances, he is in a different position in his life, and basically he's out for revenge. That's what's going on with him. Amazing friendships in the story. We get some wonderful dynamics between the Sword Brothers. There's a lot of training battle scenes, and Tao is an incredibly driven, focused person on doing whatever it takes to get to his end goal, which is revenge. Again, Evan Winter's writing style, very, very accessible. That's a big theme in this entire video and in anything that I recommend for a good beginning place. I think accessible writing style is half of what will make it a good starting place, and I think Evan Winters has a very accessible writing style. I think that the plot itself is familiar enough, revenge plot, battle sequences, it's familiar enough that it's not going to be difficult for people. The fact that there's such great relationships in it is going to make it easy to latch onto. I think that this book is incredibly unique, but it also does a lot of stuff that's familiar enough that it'll be easy to fall into a rhythm with it, or at least it was for me. That's what I think. Now let's go to sci-fi. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend for sci-fi is going to be, again, a very recent read, and that is All Systems Red. This is the first novella in a bundle of novellas that lead up to a novel called the Murderbot series. I think that's what it's called. This first little novella follows a robot who is a murderbot. It really doesn't care about its job. It just wants to sit around and watch soap operas all day. Murderbot is sarcastic, dry, witty, ambivalent, but also really layered and emotional. And this robot is incredibly relatable, as well as so funny and so easy to love. Also, it's super short, so you're fine. Also, this series of novellas, the first one is really just focusing on who Murderbot is and getting attached to it. And then the following novellas, I'm told, are going to be more focused on world building, side characters, stuff like that, still with Murderbot as the main focus, but then we start focusing on other things. So you get a chance to fall in love with the main lead before you're assaulted with a bunch of scientific terminology. Next I'll recommend is Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is the book that the first movie was based off of. It is very similar, or rather the movie is very similar to the book, so you're not gonna be in for a whole new story, but in my opinion, the book really was better because, first of all, it's a very slow start, but a very, very interesting start. Super intriguing beginning. Very, very immersive writing style where I really felt like I was there. And Michael Crichton does a good, or Crichton? I still don't know how to say his name, does a great job of giving you all the information you need to start a lot of the scientific stuff without it really being an info dump or overly complex. It's done in a very engaging way. And because he takes his time so much, when things start escalating, I was on the edge of my seat because I felt like I was there too. And I was actually worried because I might die too. I think this is such an immersive book and a great starting point for sci-fi. Next is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I'm pretty sure this is a duology and the second book just came out. This is a first contact story following a girl who just happens to be in the right place at the right time, where a giant statue-like thing that looks like a robot has been placed near her, and she takes a video in front of it and it goes viral, and it turns out that this thing is extraterrestrial and there are these things all over the world, and now she is an important part of the discovery of what's going on. I think this book was just really personal, which makes it really personable, which makes it really easy to read. Hank did an amazing job of making his lead character feel really real and very human. She has very distinct flaws, and those flaws are so human. Those flaws are so honest, and I think in large part it's because Hank did base a lot of the story off of his own personal experiences. Her instant fame was reflective of his instant fame. Her flaws are reflective of a lot of his flaws when he was first going through his instant fame, and that really shows because she feels very, very real. And I think along with this being a first contact story, which is, you know, something that we've all experienced before, first contact is a very standard storyline. So the fact that it's something familiar, but Hank does a great job of doing something really unique with this familiar thing, that coupled with how incredibly real the main character felt, makes this such an easy book to just fall into and forget that you're reading, but while you're still reading it. You forget that you're reading because you feel like you're there. There we go. Last sci-fi book I'm going to recommend on the list is Axios End. This is also a first contact story, also by someone who's quite notable here on YouTube. And Lindsay Ellis herself specifically says that this book is very similar to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which I didn't know when I reviewed it on my channel. I definitely enjoyed this much more than Axios End, but I think that Axios End was also a very interesting story and a great starting point. She also has a very straightforward, accessible writing style, though admittedly much less immersive, in my opinion, than Hank's. These are both debut novels. They're both first contact stories. For Axios End, we're following a character, Cora, who's really just trying to live her life. She's just trying to stay out of the spotlight. She wants people to leave her alone. Enter Ampersand, who is an alien who has decided, you're my communication device. I'm gonna communicate through you now. The first half of the story is a pretty standard first contact, government conspiracy sort of book, and then the second half really does veer off and do its own thing. I think that Lindsay's work in alien hierarchy and social systems and the discussion of how far society truly will go was all really interesting and very philosophical, and I enjoyed it a lot. I just wish this book had done a little bit better at deviating and being its own thing, but the second half definitely did a better job at that than the first half did. Cora is a character, I saw a lot of complaints that because she is a character that's more passive and less active, as far as like she's jerked around by the plot. She doesn't really want to do anything that's happening, so she just kind of goes with it and she doesn't forge her own path, and that bothered a lot of people, but it felt intentional to me, so it didn't bother me. Overall, this book is getting pretty mixed reviews so far, so I guess go with it however you want. I thought it was good. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a solid book. So those are the books that I have to recommend to you today. I specifically focused on adult, but it'll work whether you read YA or adult. These are really great places for starting. If you don't want an info dump, if you don't want a bunch of scientific terminology, if you don't want a massive world, if you want to keep things a little bit more contained so that you can dip your toes and really feel comfortable before you get into some of the heavier places, these are all books that I either at the very least think are solid, but most of them that I think are phenomenal and I love. Anyway, here's the ad.
As a photographer that transcends the art form, it's very important for me to have a website that allows clients to schedule sessions with me very easily through my Squarespace website. They can see my availability and reschedule with ease.
Well, I'm a very important influencer, obviously. You probably recognize me. As an important blogger, it's important that Squarespace has great blogging tools so I can share my stories, photos, videos that are important to me, and I can even schedule posts to go up on my website whenever I'm ready. They also have social sharing, so all of my followers are able to share my posts from their social medias, Tumblr, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, you name it. They make me famous. So in all seriousness, Corey and I actually both use Squarespace for our websites. I highly recommend them, so be sure to check out the link in the description where you can get a free trial as well as get 10% off of your domain name whenever you're ready to launch. Be sure to chat with me more in the comments. Are there any of these books that you have read? What did you think? Are there any books that you're going to be picking up now? I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.